Okay, well, why don't we make a start? Welcome to this webinar. I'm Alex Zimmermann, the chair of the IUCN Specialist Group on Human-Wildlife Conflict. And this is the third in a series of webinars that we've been running to show specific case studies of successful examples of working towards coexistence. Now, this is a collaboration that we've been running for some time together with the FAO of the UN. And these case studies have been put together with a number of colleagues, several joining us today who I'll introduce in a minute, and they've been coordinated and put together and led by our program officer, Dr. James Stevens, who is here but off screen at the moment, and by Christina Rodina and from the FAO and the team of experts who've been working on these projects, which you will hear from today. So the purpose of these case studies is actually to give some kind of worked examples, some illustrations of what is possible, what can be done in a positive way. We're so often talking about human-wildlife conflict in the negative, in the desperate situation it is very often around the world. And here are some positive stories where we're showing and actually explaining in detail how it was possible to work towards resolving these conflicts and making good progress. So we're going to hear from some very nice examples today. And actually, the focus today, the thematic focus, is actually financial instruments. So we're looking at economic and financial incentives and instruments for making coexistence happen in the wider sense. We're not specifically looking here at compensation, for example. We're looking at a range of things, which you'll hear from in a minute. So if we could have the next slide. What we've got in the program today is we're first going to hear from 3 presentations, and then we'll have lots of time for a moderated discussion and lots of input from you as well, questions, comments. Towards the end, I think we'll even have time to speak up, but you can also at any point put your questions and comments into the chat or the Q&A. So we're going to have brief presentations. We'll start with my colleague Ximena Velez-Liendo, who has been working on Andean bears for a very long time in collaboration with Chester Zoo and WildCRU of Oxford. She's going to tell us about financial incentives of getting coexistence with bears in the Andes. Then we're going to hear from Paul Steele and Barbara Chesire from their work on insurance for human-wildlife conflict, specifically with elephants in Kenya. After that, we're going to hear from Anna Songhurst from Coexistence Trust, who's also going to tell us a very nice example of revising the cost-benefit imbalance for communities in Botswana. So I think we'll start with these presentations. And feel free to insert your questions as they go along. And I think we will try and take questions after each talk as well. So can I ask Ximena, if you are there, to share your presentation, and I'll hand over to you.
Here. Hello. Yes. Okay. Let me see. Share. Can you see it? Good. All right. Okay. So thank you very much. Good morning from my side of the world. I'm based in Bolivia, so here is early morning, and I'm extremely pleased to share our experience and our work of working with bears and people, and now with bees, towards coexistence. My name is Ximena Velez-Liendo. I'm a conservation scientist. I'm a conservation fellow at Chester Zoo and WildCRU. So very happy. So it's very interesting how for thousands of years, humans and carnivores, we have developed these interesting relationship with carnivores. because we have compete for resources, for food, for land, for many years. And unlike herbivores, this relationship with carnivores is more prey to prey, and perceptions and attitudes towards carnivores is extremely different, because we fear of carnivores, and it's this fear that make the coexistence with this particular group of animals extremely challenging. So I work with bears. Andean bears are the only bear species in South America. It is an endemic species that lives in Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. And in Bolivia, we've been working in the southernmost distribution range of this beautiful animal. And we work with people. We work in areas that they are not protected areas. We work in communal areas, and we work in the last fragments of one of the most critical ecosystems in the entire region, which is the inter-Andean dry forest. So bears and people, they have coexisted for many years, but because of the advances of people into their habitat, conflict for land and resources has increased to the point that bears have been almost exterminated from the dry forest. It was 6 years ago when we started working in this ecosystem that the density of these animals was extremely low. In a year, we only identified 5 individuals. And now, after all of this work, especially this work with people, we have increased the bear population, and now we have more than 40 individuals in these fragments. It is extremely challenging because, as I mentioned before, humans and carnivores, they don't really like each other. So humans, for humans, carnivores can represent a threat. As you can see it here, this cow was killed by a bear, and it's not just about the cost, the economic cost, but it's all about the attitudes and all these really bad perceptions about bears being really bad for us. But at the same time, all of this tolerance and for bears and all this persecution that we have been recording all of these years goes against all of these efforts for the conservation of these species. I really like this picture, the one on the bottom left, because is this man, Mr. Attilio, who was against the project from the very beginning. He was always against. He was always saying that the bear was really bad. That the bear was we should take the bear out from their land. But because we've been working with them, trying to understand what is the problem, because we wanted to know if bears were really that bad. I mean, how are they surviving? So we developed a program first to understand and to measure what are the attitudes and tolerance and perceptions towards these animals. And the answer was that the biggest threat to the Andean bear wasn't really the fear. It was about the lack of value. It was about like, why should I protect the bear? What is the benefit that I'm receiving by protecting the bear? And that's how we developed this program. So the first thing was to identify these economic alternatives, because we identified that the cattle wasn't really, well, cattle is the main threat for the ecosystem, for the bears, and for the and for human well-being, because the cattle in this ecosystem is not there's no food, there's no enough pastures for cattle. So we were in the task to identify these economic alternatives for livestock, because once that we identify those, then we aim to reduce the livestock, the number of livestock. And once that we reduce the livestock, we are seeing now how the forests are restoring and how that that is supporting more bears, or reducing bear killings, and reaching the coexistence that we are living at this moment. So yeah, working with people. So we had to work with people. And even though I don't like to work with people because I'm a biologist, I have to do it. I had to do it. So it was very interesting to understand and to see how they perceive these animals, and identify these economic alternatives that could provide value, that could become sustainable, that they could be nature positive, and at the same time identify something that could have an extra value. Because one thing is, I don't know, supporting communities in, I don't know, in agriculture activities, I don't know, maize, for instance. But how about if maize doesn't have a really good value in the market? So the team was working in identifying something that could have all of those elements, sustainability, nature positive, but a high value in the market, and something that could become something easy to expand and to replicate. So after all of these discussions, we identified beekeeping as an economic alternative to livestock. And we started this process, this capacity building, excuse me, with these communities. And the results were really, really positive, because bees, they support the agriculture, pollination of these communities. Secondly, honey has a really good value, at least in Bolivia. Number three, the capacity building, it's not a heavy work. It's not heavy. And because our communities, the average age was about 40, 50 years old. So we were also looking for something that they could carry on without much help. So this is a good example of how this really humble activity, which is beekeeping, it is supporting the coexistence of these communities, of these people that you can see here, and the bear, and the entire ecosystem. So something that we wanted to put in this initiative was the face of this bad bear, because we wanted to change the attitudes and increase this positive, try to change, basically to change the bad bear to the good bear. And it was really nice that the community agreed, and it was actually from the community, the brand of these products was Valle de Osos, which means Valley of Bears. So it holds the bad image of a bear into a good one, because it is the bear who's holding, all this hope, all of these good things that these people are receiving because they have bears in their ecosystem. And now we are expanding. We're working with more with Melliponas, which is the native bee species, and this brings another positive element into these economic incentives to coexistence, because now we're working with this very high-end product, which is the honey from these bees, which brings more money to the communities. But the communities are more positive about the support for the pollination, work of these bees. And now, from this group of beekeepers that we started 5 years ago, now we're moving towards a more diversification activities, and one of them is obviously we're still supporting beekeeping, and they are also investing into their own beehives and learning other ways that they could take advantages of beekeeping. But also this year we started supporting coffee plantations. So this will be it will be the first time that coffee will be planted in this type of ecosystem. But what is really nice about this, and I think this is a good sign that this project is reaching its goal, is that the communities are extremely positive and they believe in these new economic alternatives. I know that it's not easy. I know that we still have a lot of time to keep supporting them, and I know that there will be some failures that we need to overpass. But what is interesting is that the model that we applied in supporting these communities, I think it is a winning strategy. And the strategy was that our support as a conservation project is not providing the entire economic support. For instance, we don't support the 100% of beekeeping. We support 70%, and the communities provide a 30%. That provides more, I think, and our assessments shows that provides more ownership to the community. So because I'm investing, because I'm giving money to this to buy a beehive, that is more they have this ownership feeling that we believe it was key. So yeah, I just want to finish my presentation with this beautiful picture. I really like this, to see the faces of these people, that they coexist with these animals, with bears and pumas, and at the same time they are producing their honey. And hopefully the next year will be the same picture, but with coffee. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ximena, for that fascinating case study. And very nice to hear this specific practical example. So we've got some questions already, and several times people have asked about honey and bears. And isn't the bee hives going to attract the bears even more? What do you think about that?
No, that's something that lots of people also asked, and unfortunately, no. No, unfortunately, no. And there are other animals that honey badgers, of course, but so far none of our bee apiaries have been attacked. So it's good. All the apiaries are protected. But no bears. Bears, they don't like honey, I think.
You have very well behaved bears, it seems.
Yes, very well behaved.
Great. I will do one more quick question. This is from PJ Roberts. Thank you for this interesting case study. With regards to sustainable alternative livelihoods to reduce livestock numbers, is there any resistance to that? He's found that they found that in Africa, there's a link between social status and number of cattle owned, and so that presents a little bit of a challenge. Do you have any experience along those lines?
Definitely, it's the social. It is culture. The aim of the project is not exterminate cattle, although I would like to exterminate the whole cattle. But we have reached an agreement. And that if we reduce the 15% of current cattle numbers, then we will start reaching a more sustainable way to for the cattle owners to have a more how can I say? Okay, we need to reduce the 15%. And that number was agreed with the cattle ranchers owners, which I think it's a massive achievement. And the way that we did it, the way that we are currently doing is one with the economic alternatives, and secondly is by improving the cattle ranching management. And that's helping to reduce. I mean, we don't want to reach to zero, because people they always had cattle, and it would be ridiculous from us to reach that target. But if we reduce to the 15%, then we believe that the forest will start regrowing, and it will be more positive for entire system.
Great, thank you. There's quite a few more questions coming in, actually. People want to know a lot more about your project. They're in the Q&A, so we're going to sort of move on, but you might take time during the rest of the webinar to answer those in the Q&A if you wish. But we'll also come back to more collective questions at the end. So I think if it's okay, we will move on to the next one. We will have more time for discussion at the end. So I would really like to thank you very much, Ximena. I would like to invite our next two speakers, Paul Steele from IIED and Barbara Chesire from AB Consultants, who've done some fascinating work on the opportunities and challenges of using insurance in human-wildlife conflict in Kenya. So I will hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Alex, and thanks to IUCN and FAO for inviting us to share our work. So I'm going to kick off by sharing the overall framework for the work, which was a project by IIED with partners in Kenya, Malaysia, and Sri Lanka, supported in Kenya and Sri Lanka by the Darwin grant of DEFRA, and in Malaysia with some work from some funds from the GEF. And then Barbara will present after me, and Farina will present maybe in the discussion about the work in Malaysia. But just to kick off, as an economist, I'm sure many of you are aware of this, but my own view is that, as we all know, human-wildlife conflict is about the shocking costs of human-wildlife conflict that the poorest people bear in many of the most remote landscapes. So it's an example of massive inequality and also the huge potential backlash against conservation as these poor communities face increased costs. So that's the overall context. And I'm going to just preface this with 3 quick points, and then we're going to have a quick video, and then we'll hand over to Barbara. So in terms of the first point, there are 2 main mechanisms for, if you like, post-disaster, post-conflict incentives. I mean, Ximena's presentation was about, if you like, managing the conflict before it starts, but this is, if you like, once the conflict has already happened, how can you deal with that, which is sadly the case in many places. So the one which exists and which people are probably more familiar with is compensation, which is typically government funded through the budget. And then the other second approach is insurance, which is often privately managed through and funded by customers or other sponsors who pay the premiums of the insurance. So that's the first point, compensation versus insurance. The second point is that we did a literature review, and I'm sure many of you are on the call, would agree that the track record of compensation by governments is fairly mixed. Often the payments are quite slow. There's fraud involved. They don't reach the right people. There's a lot of underpayment. So basically things are not working as we would wish. And so we wanted to look at the role for private insurance, particularly in some of in developing countries, to try and address that. But the insurance that exists in developing countries is mostly led by civil society organizations and NGOs, which is fine, but frankly, no disrespect, they're not experts in insurance. So I think that's maybe why some of those schemes have remained fairly small scale. So we wanted to look at a large scale, privately managed private sector insurance scheme. So that's the second point. The third point is 4 challenges to bring in private insurers. The first one is the administrative, or what economists call transaction costs of managing the scheme, which I'm sure Barbara can talk about in terms of how to bring those down using technologies and so on. The second one is fair and timely payments, so we avoid the shortcomings, which, as I say, have beset some of the compensation schemes in existence. The third one is perverse incentives, as with any insurance scheme, such as insurance for your house, for example. If you have insurance for your house, you may not bother about making sure the windows are shut. So insurance companies typically provide rules to overcome what, again, economists call moral hazard. So how can we introduce that in the human-wildlife conflict? And then finally, and most importantly, as we realized over the last 3 years of implementing this project, is the need for affordable premiums, because as I said at the beginning, we're dealing with some of the poorest, most vulnerable women and men on the planet. So how to address that? And again, Barbara can talk about this more in the Kenyan context and Farina in the Malaysian context. We are hoping that they can be paid for by customers, because as Ximena was saying, ownership and engagement by the customers is important, but they certainly can't pay the full cost of the premiums. So we've been looking at ways to engage governments, although they often are very cash-strapped. Donors are a second way, although typically they're unreliable. We all know donor funds come and go. Tourists is another option, looking at tourist park fees. But again, as we've seen with COVID, tourist fees come and go. But finally, there's the role of the international community and actually a new financial instrument which we're experimenting with called biocredits, which mobilizes financing from private and public individuals all across the world. That biocredits is something which we could have a whole other webinar on, so I won't go into that. But I'll stop there and invite James to quickly put on a 4-minute video about the work, and then Barbara will give more details. Thank you very much.
Nature and wildlife are what makes many countries so special. At the same time, animals and a thriving environment are vital to the economy and to people's livelihoods. And that's the dilemma. As population numbers increase and agricultural land expands, how can people and wildlife exist together? In Kenya, for example, the places often affected the most are the rural areas that are so important for wildlife tourism. Animals, particularly elephants, are increasingly sharing the space where pastoralist farmers and their families live. The result is a clash of interests, with wildlife causing injury and physical damage to buildings and to crops. In return, people's anger and frustration leads to elephant deaths. And it's a problem for Sri Lanka too.
Human-elephant conflict is a huge socio-economic issue in Sri Lanka, purely because of the human population pressure and the expansion of agricultural lands. Therefore, human-elephant conflict has escalated in the past several years, especially in the past decade. 44% of Sri Lanka has elephants and humans occupying the same space outside protected spaces. On average, the past few years, we've been having about 400 elephant mortalities and about 100 human mortalities, which are the highest numbers recorded for conflict globally.
අලි මිනිස් ගැටුම කියනකොට ඇත්තටම අපිට ගොඩ කරදර තිබුණා පහුගිය කාලේ. ඉතින් ජීවිත 3ක් අහිමි වුණා අපේම ඥාතියින් මේ ගමේ. ඈතට ඉස්කෝලේ යන ළමයෙකුට උනත් හරි කරදරයක් තිබුණා මේ අලි ප්‍රශ්නේ නිසා. ඉතින් අපි හරි අමාරුවෙන් තමයි මේ දේවල් කරේ.
This competition for the same space is not going to go away. A solution must be found which works for humans and for wildlife. That's where private insurance comes in. A scheme that covers the cost of farmers' losses and enables them to get on with their work, while allowing elephants and other animals to seek what they need to survive.
Tuko na changamoto ya aina mingi sana. Kama moja, tunakuwaga na mandofu wenye wanatusumbua sana. Tangu weke chakula chini, kitambo uje upate, ni kwa majaliwa ya Mungu tu. Maana wanyama ni wengi na wana usumbufu, hasa kwa wakati huu wa kiangazi. Maana hata wao wako na njaa, wana kiu, na sisi ndio tuko karibu na maji, na wao wanakunywa ya lazima.
Conservation organizations and governments for whom human-wildlife conflict is an issue must start to think how they could work with insurance companies to resolve the problem. These companies have specialist knowledge of managing risk-based schemes and are skilled in reducing administrative costs, leveraging technology, making payments efficiently, and setting up anti-fraud measures.
Kungekuwa na hiyo bima ya kusaidia, ingekuwa mzuri, maana kama haungepata hiyo kwa wingi vile uliotesha ukedhani utapata kwa wingi ama utapata mengi, lakini utarudisha kitu kidogo kuliko saa hii uweke chini na iharibiwe ama iishe kabisa. Kama kutakuwa na hiyo bima itakuwa ni afadhali, kwa sababu watatupush kidogo, kama sio kwa wingi kidogo.
In Kenya, The government is exploring whether it could hand over its wildlife compensation scheme to the private insurance sector to manage. In Sri Lanka, they are testing the idea too.
ඇත්තටම එහෙම රක්ෂණාවරණයක් ලැබෙනවා නම් හරිම සතුටුයි. ඉතින් එහෙම එකක් තමයි වෙන්න ඕනේ.
This approach being piloted in Kenya and Sri Lanka to allow people and animals to thrive in close proximity and for nature to be conserved could be an important way forward. The government wildlife agencies and conservation NGOs in other countries could implement private insurance as well to promote the coexistence of humans and wildlife.
Thanks very much. Now I'll hand over to Barbara, who's I think the director of AB Consultants in Kenya and has been a great partner on the ground.
Thank you, Paul. Paul, can you see my screen?
I can, yeah. Except
Okay,
it's not
great.
full screen there, Barbara.
It's not?
It's not, yeah, now it is.
Okay, must just be the slow internet. So thank you, Paul, and thanks for the remarks and for the video as well. I think it really frames what I wanted to share. And my name is Barbara, Managing Director of AB Consultants. AB Consultants is based in Kenya, and we're an independent market driver seeking to increase insurance penetration across Africa. And we do this through capacity building in the insurance industry. So we do a lot of research work, and our interest is really just to see how we can actually make insurance a useful tool for the reduction of poverty. So currently in Africa, I just want to put the context of how did we even end up doing this work with Paul and his team at IIED. So the penetration of insurance, insurance contributes about 2.8% of Africa's GDP. And this is very small. I think if you look at the Western world, it's above 20%. If you look at South Africa, which has the highest penetration in Africa, it's at 15%. Now, this is despite so many households remaining exposed to risks that could actually be insurable. And in many parts of Africa, as we've had today, and of course, I know it's in other parts of the world as well, it's only that we are very focused on Africa. Human-wildlife conflict is a risk that is mostly uninsured and keeps a lot of marginalized communities and low-income households in this vicious cycle of poverty. So in fact, I want to just tell a short story when Paul and IIED approached us and said, do you think it's possible to actually design a human-wildlife conflict insurance scheme? And I remember thinking, this is probably the craziest thing I've ever had. And insurers are generally very conservative. And I think despite the fact that we are experts in risk, we're very conservative when it comes to venturing out. But one of the things we do at AB is that we really try to explore the areas that most insurance companies will actually feel that this is not possible. And we're very grateful to IIED, Darwin, because if it's not for them, we probably would not have been able to just explore and see whether this is actually a risk that is insurable. Now, of course, when we talk about why do anything about human-wildlife conflict, especially from an insurance perspective, and from the Kenyan context, we have communities feeling that they're less valued than wildlife. During our research, when we would speak with people out living in close proximity with wildlife, they would actually say, if today one of us is attacked by a wildlife, it would take a very long time for anyone to respond. Yet, if we were to retaliate and kill a wildlife, we would then have helicopters landing here, and you'd be facing up to a 20-year jail term. So there's that feeling that are people really valued? Are these communities valued in comparison to wildlife? In Kenya, we also have a compensation scheme, but it's very slow. Sometimes up to a few years in terms of backlog. We have low trust levels between the current scheme and the communities, and also communities derive little value from the wildlife and yet such great loss. And of course, at the end of it all, we have these retaliatory attacks on wildlife that threaten, the livelihood of these wildlife as well. As much as there is a threat on communities, at the same time, on the other side, the threat also exists on the wildlife. So one of the first questions we asked ourselves is it really insurable? I remember thinking, there's no insurance company that will even look at this twice. And so some of the aspects we looked at is, are the risks random? And yes, they are. I know someone challenged me and said, elephants know exactly what they're doing, and it may not be random. But generally speaking, human-wildlife conflict can actually be modeled to be random. Do many people face the same risk? Yes. So it's a risk that is faced not just by a few people in possibly one area, but it's a risk that several people face it. For example, in Kenya, we have about 10,000 cases of human-wildlife conflict in a year. And are they predictable, or can they be modeled can you build a model around this? And what we found is, based on the data we reviewed, is that this is actually possible. And this is what gave us the confidence to say that, yes, human-wildlife conflict is insurable. The other thing we looked at is, what are these risks that arise from human-wildlife conflict? And if you look on the right side of the screen, we have the 5 main risks: death and injury of human beings. And then we have crop damage, livestock predation, as well as depredation as well. And then we have loss of property. And when we talk about property, we're looking at homes, water tanks, pipes, fences, and all the things that people really invest their money into.
Sorry, Barbara, just in the interest of time, maybe you can speed up a little.
Okay. Okay, and when we look at it from an insurance perspective, some of the aspects we were looking at is data analytics and actuarial modeling. We were able to also get reinsurance backup. We've been involving the communities in terms of developing the claims verification. We've also developed a claims verification platform that leverages technology. And we're also leveraging on the aspect of the principle of loss minimization, meaning this scheme can only be successful if there are mitigation strategies in place. For the interest of time, Paul, I'll skip this. This is just the claims verification process that we've developed. And some of the key highlights, I won't go through this, but some of the key highlights is that it involves the communities, leverages technology. There's information parity, meaning every single stakeholder has access to the same information at the same time. And then there are also quick turnaround times. And I'll just spend the last minute just answering the question, why insurance? And for insurance, we're able administration of human-wildlife conflict, because you're looking at pulling risks from different types of risks, not just human-wildlife conflict. We're also hoping that we can actually pull risks from across the continent and even leverage a single reinsurer. We also want to leverage existing expertise in claims assessment and technologies that currently exist in the insurance industry that can actually make the process much faster. And we're looking at settling claims, as fast as a week, if not faster than that. And of course, within the industry, because they are regulated, we're looking at effective governance and regulatory structures to increase trust through transparency and be able to detect and reduce fraud, which will in the long run make the scheme more affordable. So I'll end there and I look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara and Paul. I think that was a fascinating and very nice and clear explanation of what can be done with insurance, and explaining also the obstacles to setting something up. What I'm fascinated to know is how this is applicable elsewhere and what are the conditions needed. I'm just checking whether we have specific questions on insurance at the moment. We're going to take maybe one very quick one and then move along. I've got one question from Eva Gross. You mentioned the importance of defining rules for payouts to avoid perversive incentives. In your examples, how do you connect human wildlife conflict insurance schemes with prevention measures?
Okay. So one of the things we've done in the definition of the scheme is that a claim is only valid if certain rules have been followed. So one of the main, the number one rule is that you can only be paid if you are outside a protected area, for example. So if a loss happens within a protected area, within a park, or within an area that, ideally speaking, people should not be within, your claim will not be paid. Secondly, there's also certain mitigation. Communities should demonstrate that they've actually put certain mitigation strategies into place. And of course, because it is a scheme that is going to be supported by government, the government will also support by putting up fences in certain places. We are also hoping to work with organizations, for example, the ones that do bees, chilies, and generally there has to be some level of demonstration of mitigation by someone who is claiming. And of course, also there'll be, if I had time to explain the claims process, there has to be witnesses also from the community. So a neighbor has to actually say that, yes, this particular claim happened, and therefore, and of course also when we send out the person to do the verification on a motorbike, someone goes out on a motorbike, they'll be able to assess and see whether there was any lack of care or lack of mitigation by the person who's claiming.
Thanks so much, Barbara. It's fascinating, and clearly there's so much more you could explain in the technicalities, which would be wonderful to hear. We are going to move on. There are more questions for you, but I'll try and come back to those at the end. So thanks very much, Barbara and Paul. Also, there will, we've shared the link for the previous case study by Ximena, and there will be one just like this for the one you've just heard, but it's in preparation still. We'll be sharing that as soon as it's ready. Okay, so let's move along. I would like to invite our third speaker, Dr. Anna Songhurst from the Coexistence Trust, who's going to talk to us about her project and experience on building an elephant-aware economy, which is about reversing the cost-benefit imbalance. So over to you, Anna.
Great, thank you, Alex. Let me just turn on my video. There we go. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm calling in from Botswana, so it's afternoon here and it's very hot. But yeah, nice to be here, and thank you for inviting me to talk today. So yeah, I wanted to just share with you some of the work we've been doing in Botswana, which is a different approach to trying to reverse that cost-benefit imbalance for community sharing space with elephants. And we're calling it building an elephant-aware economy. Okay, so where we focus our work is in northern Botswana. And in Botswana, we've got the largest population of elephants. We have over 130,000 elephants, and that's actually part of a bigger range within the Kavango-Zambezi Conservation Area, which is estimated to be around 220,000 elephants. So that's the largest contiguous population of elephants left in the world. And we focus all of our work in an area around the Okavango Delta, which is in the north of Botswana, in an area called the Okavango Delta Panhandle, which is where the Okavango River comes into Botswana, and then goes out into the Okavango Delta. And this area is a key part of that kind of bigger range for elephants across the Ximena region. Elephants move from this area up into Namibia, Angola, and Zambia, and also across to Namibia. So we have, in this area, we have around 16,000 people and around 16,000 elephants. This is in the Eastern Panhandle, which is about 8,500 square kilometers. And so we have elephants moving from dryland resources coming down to the Okavango River and the Delta, and they need to then pass through where people are living. So we have a lot of people settled in settlements and using fields, and they have their livestock all the way along the river and the top of the Delta. And so what you get then is a competition for space is a big driver of the conflict in this area, and there's a lot of direct conflict that occurs here. So you've heard in the previous presentations what some of those kind of direct conflicts can be, thinking about, crop damage by elephants to people's fields, direct conflict where people and elephants are coming into direct encounters, and then people are being injured or killed, or elephants are being injured or killed, and also property damage. So what happens when you have an area where there's people living with potentially dangerous animals, and there's a lot of these costs which people are having to bear, is that it can exacerbate negative feelings towards those animals, because people are feeling that there's only stress and danger involved with living with an animal like an elephant, and there isn't much coming back to them in terms of benefits. Now in Botswana, like, elephants bring in a huge amount of money from tourism, and people definitely realize that, and they understand the value of having elephants within the country. What often happens is that people feel, where they're living in communities where elephants are just causing them problems, is that these elephants that they're having to live with are causing them stress, and they would rather they weren't there. They don't mind elephants being there for tourism, but they would rather they didn't come into their fields and settlements, which is fair enough. And so you often find that, like, a big driver of conflict actually comes down to perceptions, and how people are feeling towards those animals. And so what we do under the Coexist Trust, so I'm a director of Coexist, and we focus on finding ways to reduce human-elephant conflict. And we look at it from a holistic approach, because human-wildlife conflict is so complex. It involves so many different aspects that you need to be thinking about lots of different solutions all coming together to really be able to work towards coexistence. So in terms of elephants, we are taking the approach where we look at how can people and elephants share space. That's fundamental. So looking at land use planning, trying to understand more about the elephants in the area, what their needs are, understand more about the people in the area, what their needs are, thinking about addressing immediate needs of people. So how do you stop elephants coming into the field? How do you kind of improve safety for people around elephants? And then in this area, the biggest livelihood for people is subsistence agriculture. So people are farming arable lands in order to feed their families. And elephants can come in one night and destroy a whole field of crop, which is actually a whole family's food for the year. So it has huge implications for food security. So we also do a lot of work on how to try and improve the resilience of farmers through things like conservation agriculture, improving yields and things like that. But what I want to really talk about today is this: how do we change that negative feeling? How do we try and bring more benefits back to people from the elephants they're actually living with, rather than them just experiencing all this stress and fear and negative feelings towards elephants? So this is where we come to what we're calling an elephant-aware economy, and how we're going about trying to do that. So what we mean by an elephant economy is that we are trying to reverse the imbalance between the costs and benefits for people sharing space with elephants by bringing tangible benefits back to people at the household level, and benefits that come from those elephants that they're living with. And to do this, we're supporting and facilitating a local economy. So we're trying to promote ways for people to be able to gain direct and sustainable market-linked and non-consumptive benefits as a result of living with elephants. And so we've got a number of partners that we're working on with this. We've funded through the EU, CASA, KFW, WWF, Foundation of Good Planet, and the Howard Buffett Foundation have all been involved in supporting this part of our work. So we're trying to build this kind of elephant-aware economy through a number of different ways. So the first one is tourism. So tourists come to Botswana. It's a huge part of the country's GDP. And so what we've been trying to look at is how can people who are living with elephants start to gain more access to those types of benefits. And we've helped this community group in a village called Oretsa establish a tour, which is like a cultural tour, but it's a Life with Elephants tour. So what's happening here is that tourists from high-end safari camps in the Okavango Delta are helicoptering into the village, and they come and learn what it's like to live with elephants. And then they experience a number of different activities where people within the village are explaining to them what it really is like, so that they can understand that these elephants that they are coming to see in these high-end safari camps, that there are people who are the true custodians of those elephants living on the edge of the delta, and what that means for those people and their livelihoods. And then likewise, then with these tourists coming in to do a tour like this, it means that the people within the tour group, but also within the village, are seeing that there are benefits for the fact that they are living with elephants, because tourists want to come and see that, and they're willing to pay for that. So there is a monetary benefit coming straight back to the household level. And likewise, we do a lot of work on identifying where the elephants need to move, and we've established these elephant corridors that mean that the elephants will have the space to move to get through the areas where people are living. But now it's really important that people within the communities also see a benefit from those corridors. So we've been working with a number of different communities through the village development committees to establish joint venture partnerships with tourism companies to set up. We've got one elephant viewing platform that's going to be set up on one of the elephant corridors, and we've also got a sky bed. So those are two different other types of tourism activities that can enable people from within the village to start gaining a benefit from the elephants that they're living with. And again, those tourists will be coming in from high-end safari camps, coming in from the Okavango. And then we've also been looking at, there's a lot of talent in the communities around the Okavango in terms of art, and there's rich culture. And so we have been holding these kind of cultural events, which are all around life with elephants. So people then put on performances of dance and develop different crafts and sing songs and poetry, all about what life with elephants, what their experience with life with elephants is about. And again, this is a type of way of trying to change that kind of mindset and bring a kind of a positive thing back to people as to why, and for them to celebrate a life with elephants and what elephants mean to them, because there is a lot of rich history and cultural beliefs around elephants that also mean that people don't hate elephants necessarily unless they're causing problems. So we wanted to try and kind of bring more out about that. And then from those, we've then seen that there are a number of different crafts that people already make in the Okavango area. One big craft in this area is baskets. Botswana is famous for its baskets. So what we've done is we've been working with some cooperatives of women who are basket weavers, and they have designed then baskets which are elephant themed. So they've got that elephant theme to them, and then they have their story attached to these baskets, which is enabling them then to reach bigger markets, because they have a conservation story around their crafts, and it makes their baskets different to other baskets. And so they are now connected with some really good markets like WWF Magazine, and their baskets are being sold in the US because of the story of them living with elephants. And then they see that the benefit is coming back because these baskets are different, and these baskets are related to the fact that they live with elephants, and people want to know that and appreciate their story. And also we have Elephant Dung Paper Initiative. We have another craft shop called the Saranga Craft Shop, where this is an entrepreneur who set up a craft shop, and she sources crafts from different artists who all have a story to tell about their crafts. So it could be that the wood that the carver is making their wooden canoe out of is actually, he only uses wood from where the elephants have pushed over a tree. He never cuts down a tree. So his story is that he utilizes the wood that comes from the elephants, and therefore the elephants are bringing benefits back. Likewise with the elephant dung paper, there's a direct link. And we also have an initiative of beekeeping as well, and a new cooperative that's been established called Diavere Honey, where people are then making the honey and again being able to sell that back into the safari industry, tourists, and other markets. And then, like I said at the beginning there, the main livelihood in this area is actually subsistence agriculture. So we started to think about ways that how can you bring benefits back to a farmer because they're living with elephants and they're farming with elephants. So we started to develop this concept of elephant-aware farming, whereby if people are aware of the corridors where elephants need to move, if they are protecting their fields because they're using things like chili pepper deterrents or beehives, or they're using solar electric fences, and they're also practicing sustainable agricultural techniques, so conservation agriculture or low-till agriculture, they're actually putting a lot more effort into their farming because they are coexisting with elephants. So we saw that actually that produce that these farmers are getting, if they do get a yield at the end of the season, it's actually worth a lot more, like it should have a higher value. And so we've been working with these farmers to see how we can then connect them with new markets. And so, like I say, this kind of concept of elephant-aware farming includes also diversifying crops that could be more elephant aware, so things like actually growing chili or doing beehives to harvest honey. But the fundamental thing is that these fields that where farmers are ploughing are recognizing that there are elephant corridors and they're trying to avoid them. They are using appropriate mitigation techniques to protect their field, and they are practicing sustainable agriculture. So that what we don't want to see is huge expansion of agriculture. It needs to be done in a way that is sustainable. And then we've got some cooperatives of farmers now who are elephant-aware farmers. And what we're doing as Coexistence is we're then signing a conservation agreement with those farmers where they agree that they will adhere to those criteria. And in order, because they're doing that, we then say, okay, well then we as Coexist can help you by bringing in training or more information or maybe equipment to help you with your farming. And then these farmers are then being able to become certified as what we call elephant aware. And with this elephant aware certification, they can then reach new markets. And we're in the process of developing an app which monitors this whole thing, so that then both the farmers can be monitored and we can verify that they are actually being elephant aware. And then this information can go back to the consumer as well to ensure that they know that the produce they're buying is elephant aware. And so the first market for these farmers actually was the Okavango Craft Brewery, where millet taken from these farmers, which is elephant-aware millet, is now being turned into craft beer and then sold again within the community of Maun, which is where the brewery is held, but also going into the safari industry. And then that also helps us to tell the story of these farmers and the fact that there's a conservation story behind this produce. And then the last thing that we're doing is in this kind of elephant-aware economy that we are developing is that it is about bringing back monetary benefits. That's really important to people, especially at the household level. But often what you also need is other types of benefits coming back. And so we've been exploring that and seeing where you can have other types of partnerships and encouraging partnerships between non-government organizations, the community, government organizations, and the private sector, especially the tourism sector in this area. And so one initiative that we've started in our area is called the Elephant Express buses, which is an example of a benefit that then this has all been funded by the tourism sector. But what it's doing is providing a service for vulnerable people within the community. So primarily children, and then also people who need to get to the clinics. And this Elephant Express bus then provides the transport to go across these elephant corridors. So in a way, it's an example of how by living with elephants and allowing these elephant corridors to exist, then there are these other types of benefits that can come, like improved transport. And what we've seen from these buses as well is and feedback from like the schools and the clinics are that actually what this does is it helps to improve school attendance. It's been helping to ensure that midwives can get to see pregnant women in the villages. So it's providing a service which is not only helping to improve perception towards elephants, reducing human-elephant conflict, but it also has these spin-off effects which also help with other aspects of life within the community. So in a nutshell, that is what we are trying to do here in Botswana, is to show how you can try and change that cost benefit imbalance for people when they are sharing space with an animal like elephants, which are potentially dangerous, and they require a lot of resources and space. So yeah, I would like to say thank you to all of our partners. We have a lot of partners that we work with, so a big thank you to all of them. So, yeah, look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Anna, for this, again, fantastic demonstration of the work you've done. It's a wonderful example, as have been all three that we've heard from today. I see a lot of clap reactions and comments there. Let me quickly check if we have specific questions. Let me throw one your way, and then we're actually going to go into the whole panel, have a little discussion, because we're running out of time. Everybody has lots of questions. Okay, so one quick one. So lots of stakeholders need to be involved. What do you do if government shows lack of willingness? What can be done?
Now, to be honest, you know, we haven't really encountered that, to be honest, at the moment. I think, you know, human wildlife conflict requires like working with lots of different government departments. So, you know, we work closely with the Department of Wildlife, but through this initiative, when it comes to something like trying to bring benefits back, we're also working really strongly with the Ministry of Agriculture, Department of Tourism, the land boards. And at the moment, you know, I think the thing is, in a place like the Okavango Panhandle or the Okavango, where there is a lot of human-elephant conflict, and actually government are looking for solutions. So, and it's often put down to the wildlife department that has to try and find those solutions. But what you find is that when you say, well, actually, it requires the involvement of lots of different stakeholders and lots of different departments. Everybody has a role to play here to try and reduce the conflict. I think it helps to kind of gain that support, because people can see, oh, okay, yeah, we can help to do something here. So we haven't really encountered resistance, I have to say, in Botswana anyway, for these initiatives.
Fantastic. And just one quick more, what about private sector engagement? Are you finding that?
Yeah, I think, again, you know, with private sector, there's a lot of support there. Again, people realize, you know, especially in the tourism sector, that, you know, a lot of money is being made from tourism in a place like the Okavango. But people are very aware that conflict happens on the edges, you know, and that the communities need to have some more benefits coming back to them. And so often what you find is that some of these kind of bigger corporates are trying to find ways to help, you know. And so if you can guide them in a way that there is a tangible benefit then that can come back to the community, but also it provides an opportunity for them to provide an activity for their tourists, or provide a good story because they're supporting an Elephant Express bus. You know, you need to look at it from both sides, and you can see that actually it's a win-win solution for both.
Absolutely, and great to frame it that way to all involved. Okay. Anna, we've got more questions for you, but we're going to move along and invite, because we have several more people to join us now. I would like to ask Jose, Farina, and Loki if you could turn on your cameras, if possible. If you're there, good to see you. So we are joined by Jose Gonzalez Maya from Pucat, Colombia, and he's also the chair of the Small Carnivore Specialist Group of IUCN. We are joined by Farina Othman, who is at the University of Malaysia, Sabah, and has worked on elephant conflict in Sabah for a very long time. And we are joined by Loki Osborne, who runs Connected Conservation, and has worked with communities on human wildlife conflict for ages. So actually, I want to throw a question at the three of you. Maybe we'll take turns. You've all also worked in the wider field of creating these kinds of values, economic incentives, and so on. As you're listening to these talks, any thoughts or pieces of advice from your own similar work? Maybe I could pose that questions to Jose to start with, and tell us just very briefly in a few minutes the kinds of economic incentives you've worked on.
Thank you so much, Alex, and it's great to be here, and of course to listening to our colleagues with such amazing stories about coexistence. What we've been doing is actually to develop a market incentive for jaguar-friendly production systems. So pretty much is focusing on priority areas, either habitat or corridors for jaguars, with pilots in Colombia and Costa Rica. And we've been working mostly with coffee and now expanding into cacao too. It's quite challenging, as you can see from the studies. Is this is the nice part, this is the beautiful part, of course, which is the final products of the whole process. But it's quite challenging because you're dealing with markets, because you're dealing with overall with merchandising and marketing, which is obviously not part of our stronghold. So pretty much our main challenge have been how to make sustainable these kind of incentives. So we sell coffee, for instance, we export coffee, and of course it works very, very nice on the first rounds, and you have people that is interested on buying these kind of products once or twice. But then you need to eliminate all the intermediaries, because that's where the money goes, for instance, in these types of incentives, and then make it sustainable. So you have to be competing with other products of the same kind, but of course without the premium and the extra value, right? So pretty much you have to sell the story, but you have to find a market that is interested in paying and buying these products for the long term, like us on a daily basis, pretty much. So that's pretty much the challenge, because at the end, when you manage to make these kind of products sustainable for the producers and for the market, it is usually, I'm not gonna say easy, but it's usually possible to engage people in this kind of projects or processes. And it definitely changes how people feel and think about many of these species. It of course depends on how deep rooted is the conflict, of course, but usually, and for many cases, it's just a matter of how to manage the farm, how to reduce conflict, and then provide the right incentive. So it's beautiful to see these results. But I think we still need to discuss much more about the financial and the market side of these kind of processes.
Absolutely, and it's such a, you bring together again the question of sustainability, which has come up a few times, the need for market links. There were several questions to the various speakers on that as well. And it just shows again how interdisciplinary this type of work is, how much we need a team of different backgrounds. Farina,
yeah,
let's hear a little bit about your experience.
Right. So in Sabah, we are, for our project, we're focusing more on helping the smallholders in the oil palm industry. As we know that, we use oil palm in so many things, right? From food to cosmetic and things like that. So, and the smallholders, especially the independent smallholders, they are the one who will, really, really get affected when elephants or other wildlife comes in their plantation and, do crop damages and things like this. So we are trying to focus on this specific group right now, and we are working more on insurance. Paul did mention about this earlier on his in his presentation. But we have a lot of challenges trying to get the traditional, way of insure these smallholders, because it is, first of all, we don't really have data, so we don't really understand the situation. But together with our partners from AP, actuarial partners, we are trying to now explore new ways, new ways to create this insurance program. But what we are trying to do right now, we think that it's very, very important to push to get this premium, prices. If for example, any oil palm plantation or smallholders, they can show that they produce sustainable oil palm, they should be getting good prices for the oil that they are selling. So I think once they see this, because for our community, I don't see that they want to change to other crops, like coffee or whatever. When we ask them, because oil palm is very easy to look, to take care of. It's not very complicated. It can give you a sustainable, you can harvest it even though you don't really look after the trees and things like this. So it's very easy for them. So I don't think they want to switch. But if we can push for, like premium prices and, and then work together with big corporate company like Nestle, all these companies who use oil palm, maybe then we think that this insurance can be a sustainable program. So we are still working on it, and then we will share with all of you more in the future, hopefully. Yeah.
Thanks, Farina. Fascinating to hear your experience there too. And it's so interesting that we have these different insurance and related examples, but every location, as we all know, needs to be adapted to the local context. Let me quickly hand over to Loki, your reflections, if you would like to share any thoughts.
Thanks. No, fascinating subject. A couple of things struck me, that the idea that the market side of things, the wildlife friendly, which you're talking about with the jaguar work, and it is such a, I guess from my perspective, having worked on this subject for many years, I'm very inspired by how many different projects now are thinking about this, and this has become a pretty standard discussion amongst wildlife people, which certainly was not the case even 10 years ago. So I think in some ways there's been a huge amount of progress, and the organizations like Kamako in Zambia that have managed to really find business related ways to assist conservation, and the Wildlife Friendly Network, which has really been pushing a huge number of projects. But I was also struck, though, by a conversation I had with one of our colleagues about the need to also have the West or people who are caring, wealthy countries that care about these wildlife and the people to really engage more properly. It's a big ask to think that poor people in developing countries have to bear all the costs associated with living with these global iconic animals. And I think there is a very strong argument and pressure. You think of how much money goes into all sorts of different things around the world, that it is a huge ask. And your point about the logistics of trying to get a product from a remote area of South America or Africa to be acceptable to a world market and have a supply chain to a set of stores in the United States or in Europe, it's a huge ask, and a lot of companies really struggle to do that, even when they're focused specifically on that. So I think there needs to be a realization and of the importance of investing in these sort of ideas by the Unilevers and the big and you were mentioning about the oil palm. Surely, you've got Colgate Palmolive, you've got some of the biggest food companies in the world. So it should not be a difficult discussion that there is elephant and orangutan friendly palm oil. We shouldn't eat any palm oil that isn't wildlife friendly. And then just lastly, I was so interested in the insurance side of it. The idea of the self-assurance schemes, or the mention that Barbara made about having your neighbors come and assessing, because I think one of the huge problems with a lot of these mechanisms is they are subject to corruption and to misinterpretation. And I think when you're out in a rural area and you've got people who are assessing, having a system that plays on the relationships that people have, I think is very important. And then also the use of technology. I think I was talking to some people about using remote sensing to be able to tie into, say, small scale agricultural insurance schemes that are linked to looking at drought, like the famine early warning system, that you actually have automatic payouts to communal farmers in areas, and you don't need to have the assessment in the same way that the idea of having to drive out on a motorcycle and actually visit every single field and make an assessment is hugely time and cost intensive. So yeah, I think it's a very exciting area of human wildlife conflict that has really taken off in the last few years, and I think it is the future of people really. Now that we've studied the problem across the world for so many years, having now a collective emphasis on both the insurance side of it and the financial side of it is very encouraging.
Thanks, Loki. Excellent.
So I'm positive
excellent summary. Excellent points and summary. And it's interesting to see this kind of scaling from, initially just trying to buffer costs, then to start to think about offsetting risk, then to think about creating economic value. And then the question that you raised, which we don't talk about enough yet, but is starting to happen more and has to happen more, is what about the big companies and the richer countries, and not leaving it all, the burden all just to those regions that are most affected. That needs to be discussed a lot more as well. We've got about 5 minutes or so. Would the other panelists and previous speakers like to put their cameras back on, maybe? And feel free to put your hand up if you have any further thoughts to share on this as well. I will have a quick scan for questions. Also, people who are listening, I think you are able to raise hand if you would like to speak and ask a question. We have a few minutes. Let me quickly check. Right. What questions are coming in? Let me pose this one to, okay, let's go with Paul while I continue to scan the board. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, great, really fascinating discussion, and thanks for all the participants for sharing their experiences. But I think, like so many things in kind of development, but particularly, frankly, in environment and conservation, the challenge is getting to scale. We've suffered from projectitis, if you like, lots of little projects, perfect islands of beauty, if you like, for too long. We need to really get to scale. So it's about, as Loki was saying, mobilizing and Farina, and mobilizing the private finance, which is, the world is awash with, and also and the wealthy individuals who care about these animals but don't realize the massive costs that they impose on poor communities. So really accessing that finance, which has eluded us, and making sure that it's shared equitably with those who are affected by human wildlife conflict. So it's really turning these little projects into a massive global set of programs and initiatives. And what we're doing in our context is trying to, once we do hopefully have successful pilots in Malaysia, Kenya, and Sri Lanka, and I know Barbara has a lot of requests for further work in other countries, to really get the insurance industry globally to come in as a kind of new market and a new opportunity, so that we move, as I say, from a one-off pilot to a global engagement from the insurance industry. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Do any of you on the panel have specific examples? For example, I've got a question here. Any examples of corporate CSR schemes along these lines for human wildlife conflict? Have you seen anything along those lines yet at a larger scale? Seems not. So, sorry, no, okay. The interesting thing, of course, this is universal to the topic of human wildlife conflict, is that a lot of the reason we are doing these, there are so many little projects going on, is that every case is so unique and different. And yet, and this is what we're trying to facilitate with some of these case studies also, is to try and pick out what are the process lessons that lead to better outcomes, making those transferable actually to find those commonalities of whether it's insurance in Kenya or in Sabah or in Sri Lanka. What is it that made it work, even though the conditions are so different, the cultures are different? What makes wildlife-friendly products work in Colombia and in Namibia? What is it really, not in the copy-paste sense, but in the process sense? And that's what we're trying to draw out with these case studies. We're running quite low on time. I want to give the last few minutes over to our colleague from FAO, Thomas Hofer, if you're there. I'd like to invite you for a last few comments. Thomas is with the FAO and he's a senior forestry officer joining us through the collaboration with FAO. Christina is on an airplane, I think, joining us at the moment, but I'm not able to speak. So over to you, Thomas.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Wow, that's was a very rich discussion, you know, about human-wildlife conflicts, and I heard a few very important keywords. You know, just at the end, Paul, we talked about diversity of situations. We talked about relationships between human and wildlife. We talked about new technologies which are available somehow to manage these conflicts. You talked about scaling up of case studies, you know, to the bigger picture. So, and what for me was very important is to really hear that a lot of solutions and lessons are there, you know, for upscaling. So there is a lot of solutions we can use considering obviously the diversity of situations. So there's nothing we can just translate to another context, but to enrich ideas, I think there are many solutions there. So, and obviously the focus of today's seminar was more on the financial part, and I think we heard that for financial instruments to be successful, countries really should put a greater emphasis overall on the human-wildlife conflict. I mean, that's very clear. And also, and that has to do with the scaling up, which was mentioned before, the global community should keep advocating for human-wildlife conflict to be included in global frameworks. So in that context, I'm very happy, you know, to deliver these brief closing remarks on behalf of FAO and express my appreciation to the IUCN Human-Wildlife Conflict and Coexistence Specialist Group for organizing the third webinar and the ongoing hard work on drafting further case studies from different regions. So I will not now repeat all the keywords which we just heard, but maybe just make a few reflections. So the first, obviously, is that we hope that next month at the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, that we will get new ideas on the way forward from there, because as you all know, hopefully, or certainly the 15th meeting will endorse the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which includes several wildlife-related targets, and also a target on specifically on the human-wildlife conflict. So we hope that we will get good guidance coming out of that Conference of the Parties. And allow me now to highlight that this is a particularly exciting moment for FAO and the specialist group of IUCN, since we are concluding the first phase of our collaboration and our pilot study. And within that, obviously the webinars are part of it, but more particularly, we have published 6 case studies under that first phase of the study. And these are from Tanzania, Guyana, Kenya, Bolivia, and 2 from India. And these first 6 case studies cover a range of topics, from co-developing of community camera trapping program to delivering benefits of living with human wildlife and building communities' capacities to coexist with wildlife. So 6 case studies with a very rich set, in fact, of aspects which are being covered. And we are now finalizing the last 4 case studies from within that first phase, which are 2 case studies from Zimbabwe, 1 case study from Mozambique, and a case study from Kenya, which was presented by our colleagues from the International Institute for Environment and Development earlier in this webinar. What are our future plans? We are very excited to announce that we are working on another 15 case studies in our second phase, and those will be published in 2023. So again, under the scope, to really enrich ideas, but also show solutions, different aspects of this management of human-wildlife conflict. So to really build on that successful exercise we have done with the first set of 10 case studies. And we'll be delighted to support the organization of the International Conference on Human-Wildlife Conflict and Coexistence in Oxford in spring 2023. So again, I would like to thank everyone, especially our partners in IUCN, for the efforts and for our very excellent collaboration, and to everyone here participating in this webinar. And please stay tuned about our next steps, products which are coming out of this initiative. And we wish you all a very fruitful end of the year period, and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the concluding remarks. I'm also going to wrap it up there as we're out of time. To thank all our speakers and panelists again for making the time and sharing your experience. I know this is an ongoing journey and we are continuously learning. That is the purpose of this case study collaboration. For all those who were watching, if you want to go back, if you missed links and so on, just find our website and everything is there. And as Thomas just said, we're still working on publishing quite a lot more of these case studies. They will continue to be posted there and on social media. And so meanwhile, wishing you all the very best and good evenings, afternoons as well. And yeah, keep communicating with each other and see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.